wanted to share a talk of the Lubavitcher Rebbe from 1992. And I think the rest of the talk is relevant to Noahide. And it's a really amazing talk, which I always reference for this point of how much the Rebbe valued and prioritized Noahides. And it's something that is just such a radical thinking. And because traditionally, of course, you're Jewish and you want to bring people closer to God, you bring Jewish people closer to God. And then when the Rebbe started speaking in the 80s about the idea of going out to the world with the commandments of Noah, most people viewed it as, and also, we're in a world anyway. We're interacting with many, many, many human beings. So it's nice. It's nice of the Rebbe to remind us that not only do we have a message and a mission for the 15 million Jews in the world, but we also have a message and a mission for the 8 billion mankind. So that's nice. And I think that's how most people view it. Instead of saying, are you Jewish? No. Oh, have a nice day. We could say, oh, well, I have this wonderful message for you. I have this wonderful thing to tell you about yourself. I have this wonderful knowledge to share with you. And the Rebbe in this talk was in the very beginning of February of 1992. The Rebbe is saying the concept, the mission, the focus to bring an awareness of God to the world is perhaps more important than bringing that awareness of God to the Jewish people. Maybe it's even more significant. Maybe we're doing more for God when we get all of his children, all of mankind, to remember him and to connect to him. That, who knows, that perhaps is even more our mission in reaching out to the world, which is such a radical thought. Because, what are you talking about? Isn't it more important to bring Jews back to Judaism? And the Rebbe is saying, no, not really. It's really important to bring Jews to Judaism. It's really important to bring mankind to God. They're both really, really, really important. And no, I'm not saying one's more than the other, actually. This talk came as a result of very, very significant treaties that were made in the United Nations. So this is in 1992. And something very unusual is that the heads of state of the Security Council came to Manhattan to meet not just the UN ambassadors, but actually the heads of state themselves came, and the Security Council voted, again in 1992, after we already have the fall of the USSR, and they're voting on a new world order where we want to focus on disarmament. We want to lessen our military spending, and we actually would like instead to use these resources to help support and feed the hungry of the world. So that radical new world order, that radical new perspective was voted on and legalized, mandated on Friday before this talk, which was on Saturday. And earlier in the week, on Wednesday, the president, who 1992 would have been Bush, at that point, the original Bush, he was saying, he had a State of the Union address where he's, in just talking to Americans about America, echoed a very similar refrain of wanting to lessen the defense budget and instead use this money to help with social services, with food and social services for the country. And now, of course, people can look at this as politics or this or that or empty words. The Rebbe looks at this as the beginning of the fulfillment of Isaiah's probably most famous messianic prophecy, and they'll beat their swords into plowshares, which of course is engraved in the wall outside the UN in Manhattan. Beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning tools. The Rebbe is saying that this isn't politics. This is really expressing the energy of the world. Truly, the world spiritually is at this point. We're at the cusp of the revelation of redemption, of Mashiach. And as such, the leaders of the world, the heads of state of these most powerful countries of the world, so to speak on their own, are coming up with this idea that's in essence what Isaiah said thousands of years before. What's the modern day equivalent of, and they will beat their swords into plowshares? Taking your defense budget and using it to feed people of the world. That's beating their swords into plowshares. So this messianic prophecy has already begun, and it's already changing the world. It's actually very interesting. There's an aside to this talk, but after the Rebbe said this, someone I know, he's a mathematician, so more in the science world, and he said, listen, if the Rebbe said this so strongly, I want to see how is the world doing this? Is the world beating swords into plowshares? And it was very interesting because he found that in the former Soviet Union, they really literally were doing that. They were literally taking all of this arsenal that had been designed for war. They were really finding peacetime applications for it, and they were actually taking their scientists and they were using their scientists to create peacetime applications of the sciences that they learned and were using for war. So they were really very proactively using the equipment they had and the scientific minds they had to think, how do we use this for civilian population? What's the peacetime application of all of this? And the Clinton administration actually at one point passed a similar concept, for different reasons, of course, where they allocated $500 million of the defense budget for this peacetime application of defense science and technology. In America, it was a little more complicated. It wasn't literally like Russia. It was literally taking all of this defense and offense science and technology and equipment and saying, we got to use this for peace now. In America, they were still the policemen of the world. So they weren't like trying to like demilitarize their army. But there was also this sense of like, it's not valid if it's just for the army use. We really have to think of what are the peacetime applications. Like, for example, they were looking at like satellites that have been developed by the army to be able to see deep into the Earth's surface to see if there's bombs, mines, because there'd be like infrared or heat coming out. So now they were using that same technology to scan the Earth's surface to find where there's water, where there are minerals, where there are gems, where there's more fertile land, for better farming, for better productivity of the land. So we're taking the same technology of seeing deep into Earth's surface, and instead of using it to find the bombs and the mines, let's use it to develop the Earth. My father was a scientist for the Defense Department, so it was actually done in his laboratory. He wasn't the inventor of this, but it was done in his laboratory, and he was involved with this. They were trying to create equipment that wasn't electrical, meaning because the army could be in situations and in environments and in climates, very delicate parts of an electrical system would just break, like let's say it'd be too cold. So they developed this like flowing gas is flowing within the system, so it's not dependent on any electrical parts. And the same equipment can work on some flow of gas. And the application, the peacetime application for religious Jews is, wow, you can't use electricity on Shabbos or on a holiday. But this isn't running electricity. There's nothing that's happening here that violates the Sabbath. So, for example, we can make a microphone that uses this same technology. And then you can use that microphone on the Sabbath. My father was envisioning 770, which is thousands and thousands of people, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe is talking on the Sabbath or a holiday. Imagine if you could use a microphone. Like, wow. So that never happened because my father was never able to get a rabbi who was big enough who would say, yes, this is kosher to use on the Sabbath. Or they have little detectors that they would use in the army to put on Jeep to detect bombs or mines or the enemy. And now peacetime application, let's use those same detectors and put them on cars. So the cars could be programmed to avoid accidents, to avoid collisions and crashes because they're aware, their sensors are picking up that there's another moving vehicle coming really close, so let's avoid it. So these are just some that I'm remembering in my head of this concept of swords into plowshares. In other words, when we hear the prophecy of Isaiah, and they'll beat their swords into plowshares, well, that sounds very archaic, because anyway, who has a sword nowadays? But you could sort of envision like some sword, the metal of a sword, I don't know, some blacksmith making it into a plowshare. When they're using what was developed for defense, and they're using it to make a microphone you can use on the Sabbath, or to make something you put on your car to avoid a crash, or a satellite that's going to tell you where in the earth is the best place for farming or for mining, that's swords into plowshares. And the beginning of this was this treaty that was in the UN on the Friday before this talk on Sabbath, where they're literally saying, we want to lessen the defense budget and we want to use that money to help feed mankind. Swords into plowshares. So it's very interesting because, of course, when I learned this talk, it's like, wow, this is like pivotal. This is like such a demarcation line in the world. But you never know, does the world get that these things are such demarcation lines? I remembered a few years later, I had taken my children to the Children's Museum in downtown Chicago. There's a nice children's museum there. More than one, but this is one in downtown by Navy Pier, which has free afternoons on Thursdays. And so we went there, and it was really interesting because they had as a display, like, I don't know how many years back they went, and each year, like, what were the highlights of that year? And for 1992, this was one of the highlights. Like on the, I don't know, 5, 6, 8 things they listed for 1992, one of the highlights of the year was this United Nations agreement, because it was so pivotal in talking about how the relationships of the nations of the world have to change and are changing and are going to change. And when the Rebbe looks at this, the Rebbe says, you know why this is happening? Because all the energy of Mashiach is already out there. So Isaiah is saying, as a prophecy of Messiah, of redemption, and they'll beat their swords into plowshares. Energy of redemption is already in the world. It's already impacting the world. And since it's already impacting the world on its own, they're not saying, oh, we know that this is what's going on. They're not saying that. But on their own, so to speak, they're saying something has to change. Something has to change. Something's not right. Something doesn't make sense. And you know what doesn't make sense? War doesn't make sense. War doesn't make sense. War is destructive. War is pointless. War is hurtful. War is harmful. War doesn't make sense. It's got to change. Now you could say, well, of course, all that's true, but like, didn't the world know this for thousands of years, and the world still kept fighting? So the fact that it's, of course, logically an imperative that war makes no sense, but that never stopped us. So why now is it? Well, the Rebbe says it is because the energy of redemption is out in the world. Now it's interesting because when you learn this, you could say like, well, it's really nice, but the world does not. I mean, this was in 1992. We're now in 2024. And it doesn't seem like the world is inching even closer to a world without war. I mean, if you follow the news, which of course you shouldn't, it doesn't seem like that's what's going on. But the interesting thing is, it is. There's a think tank funded by 5 governments, 5 different nations of the world, that analyzes war and peace. And they came out many times with a study on the trends of war in the world. This is happening after this talk of 1992. What they were very, very shocked to find, contrary to what we would believe, because anyone that follows the media knows the world is constantly in this horrible state, but actually globally, wars are on the decline. And they analyze like 3 types of war, like war as we would think of it between countries. They also analyze civil wars and also uprisings, we call more terrorist attacks. Not like a real army, but like, terrorism and such types of things that create violence and war in the world. And in all 3 areas, in civil wars, in wars between countries, and in uprisings, they found they all have been on the decline, and they've redone this study for many years. And they keep finding the same results. They keep finding that in some places with dramatic numbers, in like sub-Saharan Africa, which is one of the most violent areas of the world. Not that it's ever on the media, because who cares about sub-Saharan Africa, right? People only care about Israel. So anything else is like chopped liver, like who cares? But we just want to focus on Israel and show how Israel is like, horrible colonial oppressors. But if you actually look to where there's really, really horrific conflict, sub-Saharan Africa is one of the most violent places in the world. And they found, since they started this study, that the violence and the deaths over these years have decreased by 80%. 80%, which is, you can't even fathom what that means in terms of human lives. And they've actually found this throughout the world. So we think of, I mean, obviously there was 9/11 since, and obviously what's going on in Israel now, and obviously something's going on in the Ukraine and Russia. I mean, there's stuff going on in our world. It's not, we wouldn't view this as all the swords are beaten into plowshares, and they're for sure not. But the trend, the movement is there. And it's interesting because when they did this study, they were very shocked. This wasn't all what they expected to find. And they postulated why. Now, of course, you don't realize this because media only focuses on the problems. That's what keeps people coming back, because they're like on the edge of their seat. They got to know what's next, what's going on, what's the newest development. So they're not going to focus on, and it was a lovely day today, and nobody got hurt in the city. Nobody's going to turn on for that, right? They think. But when they actually found statistically that no, the world is lessening in all these areas of conflict, they were like, so why? And they came up with 3 theories. I mean, it's just a theory. What was very interesting is that one of the theories is exactly matching what the Rebbe is saying in this talk. So we're going to learn, because what the Rebbe explains is, again, why are these heads of state coming together, proclaiming, committing that we're lessening war, that we're taking the defense budgets, that we're putting it into civilian use. This was on Friday. On Saturday, Bush and Yeltsin, then the presidents of America and the Federation of the Russian states, they continued meeting privately, so to speak, at Camp David to continue this talk and really speak practically on how these two countries, now that the Cold War is history, what are we going to do to really create peace in the world? So the Rebbe explains that the reason why this is happening is because the minds of the people of the world have shifted. People think differently. And until now, people accepted war, accepted conflict, accepted aggression, accepted bullies. That was the sad state of life as we know it. And now the world says, no, we don't accept that. We don't allow that anymore. It's not acceptable. Now the Rebbe is explaining the reason why the world is thinking this is because the energy of Mashiach is in the world. And that's why the world on their own, not knowing it's because of Mashiach, but just knowing that, no, this is not acceptable anymore. So in the think tank, they don't bring in that it's because of Mashiach. But they do bring in that the one of their 3 theories on why this wars are decreasing across the spectrum, across the world, is because of exactly this point, that the minds of the people of the world no longer tolerate it. And the more it's not tolerated, the more it's not going to be. Which, of course, is true in general as we think about societies. And, of course, in our faith, it's very strongly this concept that the community is held accountable for the wrong of individuals. Not the wrong that they're doing secretly in their bedrooms that you don't know about. But if people are publicly doing something wrong, there's a certain responsibility for the group. Because the fact that people are publicly doing this wrong means on some level the group tolerates it. Because if the group didn't tolerate it, people wouldn't be doing it. People wouldn't be able to do it. They wouldn't feel safe doing it. They wouldn't feel comfortable doing it. They know they'd be ostracized. They know they'd be rejected. They wouldn't do it. Again, you want to do something wrong, you'll do it in your bedroom or your house with the door closed. But people on the streets are doing these things. That means the world is allowing it. There's an important concept in Jewish law that if something is inappropriate going on, we have an obligation to protest. We're not allowed to sit and say, well, it's got nothing to do with me. I would never do that. Or what does Americans like to say? Live and let live. As long as they're not harming anyone else, they can do whatever they want. Well, maybe they can't scream fire in a crowded theater because that might be dangerous. But if it's not dangerous to anyone else, we can't tell them what to do. We can't mandate that. And Judaism says that's not right. Because what you're doing is condoning, which means allowing, which is creating a space for these things to happen. And if it's not acceptable, it would happen a lot less. So we all always have this moral imperative to protest if something is being done that's in violation with God's will. Now, sometimes our protest might be a little softly spoken because it's hard for us to protest loudly. But on some level, we have to protest wrong. Because if we don't protest wrong, we're part of it. We're allowing it to be. Has anyone been in situations recently like this where they've had to protest against wrong, even if it's uncomfortable?
I just had it today.
Oh, Well, that was pretty recent. What happened today, Dixie?
Well, I don't get on Facebook much, but I happen to, um, I check it to make sure I have friends, that I keep up with my friends. And I was looking through, they advertise for helmets and stuff for Israel. And, and I was clicking on it to try and donate for that. But when I looked at the comments, I was appalled. The anti-Semitism with the against Israel and the soldiers. The same old thing about killing the babies of the Palestine, the same old stuff. And I don't even usually even mess with it. And this time I did. I thought, fine, you've got your opinion, I got mine, and I told them off, and they did respond to me, but I'm not even going to look at it. I don't want to communicate with them, but I'm sick of it. I'm sick of not standing up for what's right.
Right, exactly. It doesn't mean we have to go out and search out all the haters on social media to respond to
No,
them.
I
But if
wouldn't.
you happen to be on that platform and you're seeing this, it's very appropriate to respond because what you're saying is, I'm protesting. I'm not being quiet. There's a concept in Judaism, quietness is acquiescence. When you're quiet, it's like you're saying, yes, I agree. You're correct. And that's why we can't be quiet. Again, you don't have to seek it out, but if it comes knocking on your door, so to speak, or on your computer screen, yeah, there definitely is that. Anyone else has had stuff like that going on that they've had to protest?
Had something actually very recent.
Oh, wow.
So my dad was getting a award. He's a military veteran, and he was getting an award. They were having a ceremony, and it was at a church. And so, I had to talk to him about it. Where in the church is it going to be? Is it going to be in the sanctuary? Like, what kind of service is it? Is it a religious service, or are they just handing out the awards and it's just that's the building they're going to be in? Well, had to, have a lot of back and forth helping him figure that out, right? Um, so we figured it out, and thank God we did, because it was actually going to be a religious ceremony.
And this was coming from the American Army or a private organization was giving?
It's a private organization. It's a Quilt of Valor. I don't know if any of the military people on the line are familiar with that, but the lady who organized it, I would think they would have it at like a VFW or something like that, but no, they had it at the church. Anyway, so I didn't hear the service. Obviously, I had to have the conversation with my dad about us not, being part of a Christian service and a sanctuary in a Christian church. And it was a very, very, very hard conversation. And it was very sad because I want to be there for my dad, of course. I'm very proud of him. But at the same time, obviously, I think we all kind of understand. We've talked about that in this class before. I won't go into that, but, it was a hard conversation. And, my dad even was pretty upset at first, which is very unlike him. Usually he is very understanding and everything, but he was pretty upset. Like, why can't at least just the kids come or you come? And it was almost like he just didn't understand the concept. And so it was an opportunity, right, for me to explain it. And
Wow.
I think he learned a lot. And he said, I want to understand. He said, because to me, it just seems like you guys are being difficult for no reason. Right. So I had a conversation with him. Conversation didn't end badly. Unfortunately, I had to be over the phone, but we didn't hang up mad, but it didn't go well. Right. So, but he called me the next day and he apologized, and he said he thought about it and he completely understands and respects our decisions. And, he apologized for pushing me on it and trying to get me to come, even though he knew it was against, what we believe. And so today was actually the award ceremony, and actually went really well. Like, we stayed out in like the parking area and waited for my dad to come out. We made like a big sign and everything for him. And,
Well,
like,
fair to be in the parking lot.
yeah, we
Wow.
cheered for him and waited for him. Then he came out, and then, we had a nice afternoon together and celebrated, and
Shows
yeah,
you want to rejoice in his joy and celebrate his
right.
achievements, and you're schlepping there with all your kids and driving
Yeah,
there and making him a party, but you're not
mhm,
being part of a Christian celebration. Wow.
right, right.
That's
So thank
a
God I'm,
happy ending to the story.
yeah, yes, it was certainly difficult while going through on it. It really tested me. Honestly, it really did. And thank God I have James to talk through these things with, and check ourselves, right? So it just, thank God it ended well, like you said, but it was definitely a test.
I could
I
definitely
don't
see
need any
it
more
as a
tests,
test. It definitely is
but
a
yeah,
test because you could say, well, maybe it's not so bad,
right, right,
whatever. It's military. It's this. It's that. I'm not going to
yeah,
ask too many questions. I won't look. I won't take the kids or this or that. James will be with the kids in the parking lot. I'll go inside. No, it's
yeah,
definitely a test, and we definitely sometimes things are very obvious that they're a test.
yeah,
Sometimes they're more subtle, but sometimes they're pretty obvious, especially when you look back, like, okay, that was a test, God. I'm so grateful I passed. And that's definitely an example of like having to protest, not being able to just be quiet and smile and like we want to just like don't make waves, let's be sweet and likable and liked by everyone. And a lot of times that's a good strategy and it doesn't always work. And these
yeah,
are the types of
yeah,
situations where it doesn't work and there has to be that firmness and strength and not going along with the the status quo, not just going along with what's happening because we don't want to make waves. And hopefully
I
God
had the
does that.
same thing happen
Oh, really?
well, similar. When my aunt died, we went to the, I told them, my mom and dad, I told them we'll take you to the funeral. Jack and I'll take you, but we'll wait in the parking lot. Well, that didn't set well. My mom was kind of hurt, but she understood because mom was pretty much on our side. She'd come out of Christianity, but it still was the thought that it was her sister, and I wouldn't go in. And it was amazing. My uncle, what I told him, or somebody did, and he said he agreed. He said, that was fine, but the rest of the family weren't so happy about it. And I don't know. I don't think they ever disowned us, obviously, but still, we had to make a stand that we're not going in a church. We will not
yeah,
go, and that's it. No, there's nothing that's going to get me back in a church. And it happened when my best friend died, the same thing. Jack was a pallbearer, so he had to wait outside. He did walk in the church and pick up the casket, but that was, he did have to do that being a pallbearer. But we never went to the service. He did, and then he did carry the casket too. But that it doesn't set well, but we have to do it.
So I think what I've learned in my life is that for most people, they get over it eventually. I've had plenty of times in my life with people I'm close to that I've had to be very, you know, just like you're saying your situation, just like Danielle and her situation. I cannot go to a wedding that's not going to be according to Jewish law. And, there's lots of things going on today that are not according to Jewish law. And more than once, I've had people very upset with me. And eventually they get over it. It depends how long eventually takes, for different situations and different people, it takes different lengths of time. But I have to stick with God's truth. And if this relationship is supposed to be, it will weather it. It might take a long time, but eventually, a few months or more than a few months, the person will recognize I'm doing the truth. At least I'm doing my truth. I'm doing God's truth. They'll accept and feel a certain like sense of respect even for people standing up for the truth, especially for God's truth.
Yeah, that's a big one that I struggle with, especially with weddings, is going to weddings where the couple has lived together for any or like a significant period of time. I struggle with that one because on the one hand, I'm like, well, I'm glad they're finally getting married. I want to support that they're making this commitment. And in most cases, it's kind of whatever religious flavor they're into at the time, right? It always cracks me up when they have somewhat of a religious service, but they've been living together for 3 years. Um, but at this point, like more often than not, the weddings that we're invited to is a case where the couple is living together. And so we kind of struggle with that one, especially because it seems so silly when like the wedding gifts that like we got were like setting up household, dish towels, cups, silverware, that sort of stuff. Whereas now these couples have, they've already established a household for a couple of years. So it's like, what do you even get them? What, right? The registry had like exercise equipment on it.
So if there's a couple that's living together, so it's actually interesting because according to how we would view Noahide law, it depends what they mean by living together. Meaning, if they're living together because this is their commitment to each other and they're married, as they understand married, they want to be married and they're living together as a married couple, then in theory that's marriage. For a Noahide couple, they're saying we are married. In other words, for a Noahide couple, what's forbidden, of course, is this casual relationship. Is this, now with this one, now with this one, now da 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 da, jumping from person to person, and that's forbidden. But a commitment is a commitment. So if the couple is living together and they really are committed, and now they're formalizing it with a ceremony and a party, they're throwing a party because they really, really feel safe in their relationship. Yeah, it's good to go to the party, and of course not to go to what they would have their religious elements of the party. So hopefully it's a type of wedding that has it as sort of like, well, this is the religious part and this is the party, and you could just go to the party and be happy for the couple that they have come to this point in their commitment to each other, that they're formalizing it and cementing it. So obviously we rejoice that a couple's getting married. But I'm saying, again, I'm not a rabbi, but as I understand it, within the Noahide world, if a man and woman say, yes, we want to be married, I mean, God wants people to be married. So what in a Noahide world is determining what's married? What's making you married? So that commitment to each other, yes, that's it. We're going to start a family. We're going to be a man and wife, and we're committed. That really, if that in of itself would be enough for a commitment. Of course, that's not necessarily exactly how it works often in the world. But I'm saying, with or without a ceremony, with or without a party, it's really very much the degree of commitment that the couple has to each other. But in our world, I think the idea of living together without a marriage ceremony is that you never made the commitment. That you're always free to walk away, that there was no commitment, that there is no responsibility, that there is no, nothing attaching you, no strings, nothing, tying you down to this one person. And that probably perhaps is why people live together for a long time before they actually think they're going to get married, because like, who wants commitment nowadays? But in such a case, of course you can't participate in the religious part of it, but if there's a party celebrating that this couple has now really decided they're safe and they're committing for real, for real, for real, of course that's a beautiful thing. God wants people to be married and to have children and to have families and to lead good lives, which as God made us is within a family unit. That's us at our healthy best, is when we are married and have children, and God willing have grandchildren, and there's family. Family is not just the structure of convenience. It's really how God envisions that we should have life together. But yeah, we do see in all of these types of situations, if it's funerals or if it's weddings or if it's celebrations and awards, there definitely is that space of like, is this a religious one? And yes, one way or another, we have to say, I cannot participate, because that would be giving my affirmation to this fake, false, man-made, idolatrous religion, and I can't do that. Love you guys, but I can't do that. So that is always a challenge. It's a challenge that we all deal with, as is very evident from everyone's comments. It's something we all deal with, and I'm saying I also have to deal with it on standing up for God's values, standing up for God's principles, and doing what's right even when it's uncomfortable. So going back to this talk, the Rebbe here is saying that the world wasn't thinking, oh, this is the right time and place because of all the redemption energy in the world. But the Rebbe says that's why it happened. And if we look at this treaty, where did it take place? In Manhattan. Time of year it took place. Here it was, beginning of February. What was going on in the spiritual world in that time and that place? And the Rebbe speaks of how that place is in juxtaposition to the place of the leader of the generation. Now, the Rebbe never refers to himself as leader of the generation. He always refers to his predecessor, who had passed away over 40 years before. But from the Lubavitch Rebbe's perspective, he's just the hands and feet of his predecessor. So this is Manhattan. This is really close to Crown Heights. This is really close to Brooklyn. This is really close to the place from which the light of redemption shines to the world. And it's in the Jewish month, which is very connected to the Lubavitcher Rebbe and to his predecessor and to his wife. So all this Rebbe energy, which is energy of Mashiach, is at its height at this point. And very significantly, it's connected to this week's Torah portion. And the Torah portion is very, very connected. This concept in the Torah portion that I guess we will get to next week is very connected to understanding the Noahide in such a deep way, understanding ourselves and understanding how we think and understanding how we absorb morality in the world. But it's just so interesting how people can do things, and I think it's coming because I decided this and I decided that. And the Rebbe says, like, let's peer under the surface. Let's see what's really going on in the world. Because really, the spiritual movements of the world, that's what's causing what you see on the surface. You see on the surface a Yeltsin and a Bush and big players making big decisions. The Rebbe's not saying they're puppets. The Rebbe is saying they're absorbing the energy, and their choices are a natural manifestation of the godly energy that's happening in the world. And it's a godly energy of redemption. So I guess we will stop at exactly this point because it's 8:30. And now I'm about to go into this big concept that I think is very exciting to understand in terms of how we think and why we think the way we think and how this really creates the decisions we make in life. So God willing, all of that next week.